A Mongol general once conquered an empire larger than Alexander's, then died tripping over his own stirrup. Most of history's so-called deadliest warriors didn't perish in glorious duels or last stands. The truth? The world's most feared fighters were just as likely to die from a random accident, betrayal, or plain old boredom as they were on the battlefield. It's a story we rarely hear because it's not the one we want to believe. So, why do the legends of history's deadliest warriors end with a perfect cinematic death? Here's what really happened to history's most dangerous fighters, and why their actual endings are darker, stranger, and far more human than you've been told. Let's start with the most overhyped death in all of history, the Spartan at Thermopylae. Picture the scene. 300 Spartans facing down an army of Persians, every sword stroke immortalized by Hollywood. But here's the catch. Most Spartans didn't die in a heroic clash. They were outflanked, surrounded, and cut down in chaos. Their legendary king, Leonidas, his body was mutilated and displayed as a warning. The brutal reality: the deadliest warriors are rarely granted a dignified exit. But why does this keep happening? Why do we keep rewriting these stories with heroic endings? Let's jump to feudal Japan, where the samurai are supposed to die by the blade, or by their own hand. Seppuku, the ritual suicide, is treated as the ultimate warrior's end. But most samurai deaths were anything but noble. During the Sengoku era, most samurai died to musket fire or surprise attacks, not in honorable duels. The weird part is, even the most famous swordsmen, like Miyamoto Musashi, died quietly, not in battle, but of old age. So why does the myth survive? Because cultures need heroes who die at the perfect moment. Now, let's head north to the frozen lands of the Norse. Viking berserkers, fueled by rage and magic mushrooms, right? Reality check. Many berserkers died not in battle, but at the hands of their own allies, who feared their uncontrollable fury. Take Egil Skallagrimsson, the legendary Icelandic warrior poet. He died sick and blind in his bed, not on a blood-soaked field. The reason this matters: the more dangerous the legend, the more ordinary the truth. And it's not just the Norse. Let's talk about the Mongols, the terror of Asia and Europe. We imagine Genghis Khan dying in a storm of arrows. But the records disagree. Some say he fell off his horse. Others claim an assassin's blade or even an infected wound from a minor injury. Whatever the case, the Mongol legend survives because the ambiguity is more useful than the truth. Now, flip that around. What about the Aztecs, whose warriors captured hearts, literally, in ritual sacrifice? The warriors chosen for sacrifice were often the best, not the worst, picked for their skill and bravery. In a twist, the way these warriors died was seen as the highest honor, yet they were gone before their prime. So the deadliest often didn't get to grow old. Their deaths were a political message. But if you want irony, look to the medieval knight, the armored celebrity of Europe. Everyone expects a knight to die on the battlefield. The twist? Far more died from infected wounds or diseases caught in filthy camps. Take Richard the Lionheart, mortally wounded by a crossbow bolt while besieging a tiny castle, then finished off by gangrene. For every grand duel, 100 invincible knights died to bad water, rotten food, or lice. Why does this matter? Because the myth of glorious battle hides the nastiest truth. Most deaths were slow, ugly, and forgotten. Let's turn east to the Shaolin monks, martial arts legends who supposedly die only in epic combat. Yet the oldest records show most monks died from famine or disease, not fighting. Even their greatest fighters retired to teach, if they survived long enough. The truth? Even the deadliest are fragile when the world turns against them. And then there's the gladiator. Every movie promises a bloody, roaring end in the arena. But most gladiators didn't die in the ring. The majority survived multiple fights, or died off stage from exhaustion or infection. Spartacus, the most famous of all, wasn't killed in the arena, but in a muddy retreat, his body never found. The reason this matters: the legend of the arena is more profitable than the truth of a slow, dirty death. And it's not just the way they died, it's what happened after. Many of these warriors' bodies were left to rot, thrown into mass graves, or never recovered at all. But their stories were polished, repackaged, and sold to the next generation. Heroes for a price. Which brings us to the dark heart of the whole myth. These deaths are manufactured, not remembered. The real deadliest warriors? They were human, susceptible to betrayal, bad luck, and the cold indifference of history. So why do we keep clinging to these heroic deaths? Because the messiness of real death is hard to sell and even harder to accept. But if you know the real endings, you see something the legends can't show. The actual last moments of the deadliest warriors reveal what it really meant to fight, bleed, and die in the ancient world. It wasn't about honor. It was about luck, timing, and sometimes just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. So the next time you hear about a deadliest warrior dying a perfect death, remember the world is messier, and so were they. And, just maybe, that makes their stories worth more, not less. But what about the ones who escaped death entirely? The warriors who simply vanished from history? Those disappearances are even stranger and darker than any legendary last stand. If you want to know what really happened to them, click to the next story, because the greatest warriors who ever lived didn't just die. Some simply vanished. But while legends vanish, the truth lingers in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered. Let's rewind. Have you ever wondered how these myths survive for centuries, long after the bones have crumbled to dust? The answer isn't just storytellers, it's the power of propaganda. Victorious rulers needed legends to justify bloodshed, and to keep the next generation lining up for glory. Every culture picks and polishes its deadliest warrior, shaping them into the perfect example, flaws erased, awkward deaths omitted. In China, the red eyebrows peasant rebels became immortalized as fanatics slain in a single glorious stand, when most were slaughtered in confusion or deserted. In Rome, the story of Horatius at the bridge became a model of stoic sacrifice, yet records hint he probably survived and retired quietly. The pattern repeats. The bloodier and more cinematic the death, the more likely it was edited. Here's the real plot twist. Some of the deadliest fighters were so feared, their enemies made up stories to explain their own failures. The legend of Boudica, the Celt queen, ended in a suicide to escape Roman capture, or so the Romans said. But evidence suggests she may have died in battle or simply disappeared. Why? Because a dramatic ending is easier to digest than an embarrassing rout or a leader vanishing without a trace. And sometimes it wasn't about covering up defeat, it was about selling a cautionary tale. The death of the Japanese general Minamoto no Yoshitsune became a moral fable, betrayed by his brother, cornered, forced to commit seppuku. But in reality, Yoshitsune's end was less clear. Some say he escaped, living in exile in the wild north. Every culture edits the facts to fit the lesson it needs. But there's a hidden cost. When you believe every warrior died perfectly, you miss the real stakes. Battle was chaos. Luck mattered more than skill. The greatest swordsman could slip on wet grass or be hit by a stray arrow, no matter how invincible they seemed. And the most feared leader, sometimes he was undone by his own side. Julius Caesar, stabbed to death by friends in a Senate chamber, not on a battlefield. If the deadliest warriors couldn't control their fate, what chance did anyone else have? Here's the irony. The messier their end, the more real, and sometimes the more meaningful their story becomes. The myth of the perfect death is comforting, but the truth? It's a warning. If you want to survive in a world of chaos, don't chase the legend. Learn from the mess. And if your heroes seemed superhuman, remember, they bled, limped, and sometimes faded away, just like the rest of us. Which brings us to a question no legend dares ask. What did the deadliest warriors fear when the fighting stopped? Many feared old age more than any enemy. Achilles begged for glory, but Odysseus just wanted to make it home alive. The greatest samurai, Tsukahara Bokuden, spent his final years as a wandering teacher, dodging duels and seeking peace. Viking sagas whispered that dying in your sleep could be the mark of true wisdom, if you'd survived everything else. The real test wasn't how you died, it was whether you found meaning when the fighting ended. So what happened to the deadliest warriors who lived? Many faded into legend, their ordinary days forgotten. But their fears, regrets, and small triumphs, those are the stories that rarely get told. If you look closer, history's deadliest fighters weren't just killers, they were survivors, and sometimes that survival was the hardest battle of all. So the next time you hear a tale of perfect heroism, ask yourself, what happened after the last arrow fell, after the final shout faded? The answer is messier, stranger, and if you're brave enough to see it, far more interesting than any legend. Because in the end, the deadliest warriors left us more than stories of how they died. They left us lessons on living with uncertainty. And that, maybe, is the only myth worth believing. But wait, what if the greatest secret isn't how they died, but what they left behind? For every famous sword, there's a family waiting or a village rebuilt after the war. The real legacy of history's deadliest warriors isn't in their deaths, but the world that came after. So, as you hear the next tale of a perfect heroic death, remember to look past the legend. Ask what's missing. Ask who benefits. And ask what truths are waiting in the silence. Because the real story of the deadliest warriors is still being written every time we choose what to remember and what to forget. And maybe, just maybe, the most dangerous legend is the one we never question at all.